Why Japan's top pilots feared this one plane. They didn't fear many things. Not storms, not the ocean, not even death. Japan's elite wartime pilots were cut from a different kind of steel, men who trained until their hands bled, who flew until their nerves became razor wire. These were the masters of the sky, who could snap-turn a zero like it was an extension of their own spine. Their enemies respected them, their commanders worshipped them, and for years they dominated the Pacific with a level of aerial control that seemed almost supernatural. But then something appeared, a shape in the distance, a silhouette that did not behave like anything they had studied, a machine so strange that veteran pilots thought their instruments were malfunctioning. The first time it was spotted, Japanese radio operators wrote it off as an error. The second time, they thought it was an experimental prototype. By the third time, they realized they were facing something far more terrifying. A plane that didn't turn like theirs, didn't climb like theirs, didn't dive like theirs. No, this one bent the air differently. It didn't dance in the sky like the Zero. It punched holes through it. It wasn't elegant or beautiful or graceful. It was loud. It was heavy. It was brutally American. And the moment Japan's best pilots encountered it, they understood something they had never felt before.
Welcome to Battle Genesis, where the greatest battles and the most shocking moments in history come alive with cinematic clarity. If you're ready to explore the true events that shaped our world, make sure you join us. Subscribe now and step inside history. This is Battle Genesis.
The sky was no longer theirs. For years, Imperial pilots believed they were untouchable, trained since youth, molded by discipline, flying agile machines that could outmaneuver anything the enemy put up. They studied American aircraft and dismissed them as crude, overweight, clumsy steel bricks powered by factories rather than mastery. But this aircraft, this one was different. The first engagement was short, very short. A Japanese ace, 12 confirmed kills, spotted the new American plane approaching from below. He dove, confident he could snap the enemy in half before it even reacted. But instead of fleeing, the American plane climbed straight into him, accelerating in a way no Zero could ever match. And then it did something unheard of. It kept climbing, higher, faster, as if weight didn't exist. The Japanese pilot panicked. He pulled hard into a roll, the maneuver he had used dozens of times to escape American fighters. But the plane followed, effortlessly. Its wings didn't flex, its climb didn't slow, its guns didn't tremble. And in 3 seconds, the era of Japanese air superiority ended. Radio transmissions that day were filled with confusion, disbelief, even fear. Veteran pilots described the new aircraft as a monster, a sky demon, a machine that could not be outrun. Others called it simply the plane that should not exist. What made it even worse was not the speed, not the power, not even the firepower. It was the noise. Pilots said they heard it before they saw it, a deep, thunderous roar that shook the cockpit glass and vibrated the ribs. It didn't whine like the Zero. It didn't hum like other fighters. It announced itself like a storm breaking open the ocean. And when that sound came from behind you, you had no chance. Japanese commanders were forced to rewrite their manuals. They held emergency briefings. They sent scouts to track the mysterious fighter. Every recorded dogfight ended the same way. Japanese pilots disengaging, fleeing, even breaking formation, something they were never trained to do. They feared this plane so deeply that they developed a silent code among themselves. When they spotted it in the sky, they simply said, "Kare wa kiteiru." He is coming. Not it, not the plane. He, a predator. In a war defined by steel, oil, and industry, this was the first time Japan's top aviators felt hunted. One pilot, before being shot down, managed to send a final radio message back to base, a message historians still quote today because of how raw and honest it was. This aircraft ignores the sky's limits. We cannot fight what does not share our limits. And that aircraft, the one that shattered Japan's confidence, broke their aerial dominance, and rewrote the rules of dogfighting, was only just beginning to appear over the Pacific, because America hadn't even deployed it in full strength yet. This was merely the opening whisper of a machine that would earn one of the most feared reputations in aviation history. And its true reason for being unstoppable had not even been revealed.
Why Japan feared only one enemy fighter. Before this aircraft arrived, Japanese pilots had the kind of confidence that only comes from absolute dominance. Dogfighting wasn't just their skill, it was their identity. They flew machines that twisted and curved through the air with almost supernatural agility. They could flip a Zero on its back, slide into a vertical climb, and make an American pilot feel like he was chasing a ghost. But suddenly, that advantage disappeared. The Zero's greatest weapon, its elegant, unbelievable maneuverability, became useless the moment this new fighter entered the Pacific theater. Japanese pilots tried every trick they had mastered since youth: barrel rolls, climbing spirals, snap turns, diving escapes, and every time this aircraft followed them with ruthless patience, as if it were studying them mid-flight. What terrified them most was not the plane's raw power, but its refusal to lose energy. Other fighters bled speed when they climbed. This one didn't. Other fighters strained when they pulled tight turns. This one remained calm. It moved like a predator that had all the time in the world, not rushing, not panicking, simply closing the distance inch by inch. Pilots reported looking back over their shoulders, expecting to see nothing but empty sky, only to find the same shape locked onto their tail, unwavering, unshaken, unstoppable. There is a psychological weight in being outflown, but there is a deeper fear in being hunted. One Japanese ace wrote in his diary, "It follows like it has a mind. I escape one direction, it appears in another. It refuses to slow down. It refuses to give space. It refuses to fall." Soon, Japanese squadrons began to notice patterns. Every time this American plane appeared in combat, it would enter from above, diving with terrifying speed, unleashing a burst, and then rocketing back up into the clouds before anyone could respond. They had seen this tactic before, boom and zoom, but never like this. The speed wasn't just high, it was unreasonable. It changed how the entire sky worked. Veteran pilots began warning new recruits. If you see it diving, do not turn, dive. If you turn, you die. But even diving wasn't enough. The American aircraft could follow them straight down, gaining speed faster, heavier, hungrier, the wind howling around its airframe like it was built for punishment. Japanese pilots described a shocking new feeling, the sensation of being outraced in a dive. This broke something inside them. Their instructors had told them all their lives, nothing can outdive you if you commit your whole machine. But this plane did, easily. Word spread through bases across the Pacific. Some pilots didn't believe the stories. Others thought the reports were exaggerated, but all of them realized the truth the moment they saw it up close. It didn't look like something born from a workshop. It looked like something forged from war itself. Thick armor, wide wings, a huge air intake, a frame built not to dance, but to survive anything thrown at it. Japanese pilots were used to dueling opponents with technical limits. They pushed the Zero to the edge because they knew the aircraft intimately. Every vibration, every stall warning, every whisper the wind made across the canopy. But this new fighter didn't whisper, it roared. And when a machine roars, it tells you something primal. I am stronger than you. The panic wasn't just in the sky. It spread to command posts.
Officers began questioning how America could build something with so much power, so much speed, and so much structural strength. Intelligence units analyzed crashed wrecks, trying to understand the material composition, the engineering philosophy, the production capability. The answer was always the same. Japan couldn't build something like this. Not with their materials, not with their factories, not with their wartime limitations. This aircraft represented an enemy they didn't understand, an enemy who didn't care about elegance or maneuverability or tradition, an enemy who believed in one simple, terrifying idea: power solves everything. And in the Pacific skies, nothing demonstrated that idea more brutally than this fighter's engine, the heart of the beast. Pilots didn't fear its guns first. They feared the sound of the engine growing behind them, a sound that meant death was seconds away. Because once this machine locked onto you, escape was a fantasy. And Japan's pilots, for the first time in the war, began writing letters home that didn't sound heroic or confident or victorious. They sounded like men who had seen a predator coming for them and knew it could not be stopped.
The engine that changed everything. The first time Japanese mechanics examined the wreckage of this American aircraft, they were stunned into silence. They expected thin aluminum skin like their own fighters. Instead, they found armor plates thicker than anything they had ever put in the sky. They expected a delicate airframe tuned for acrobatics. Instead, they found a machine built like a flying hammer, held together by engineering that felt more industrial than aerodynamic. One mechanic reportedly placed his hand on a surviving wing section and said, "This is not an aircraft, this is a fortress." And it wasn't just armor. The internal structure confused them even more. Japanese fighters were lightweight by design. They stripped everything that wasn't essential. Radios, armor, fuel protection, all removed to save precious weight. Every gram mattered. But this American fighter did not care about grams. It cared about dominance. The fuel tanks were protected. The cockpit was armored. The engine was wrapped in steel like a shield. The wings were overbuilt to withstand violent maneuvers and high-speed dives. Where Japanese engineers valued finesse, American designers valued survival. They built a plane that could take hits, stay in the fight, and still climb straight into the sky like it was powered by anger. And at the center of it all, the part that struck fear deepest, was the engine. A monstrous, supercharged power plant unlike anything Japan could hope to produce during wartime shortages. This engine didn't just push air, it tore through it. It didn't glide, it surged. It gave the pilot control of the battlefield in a way Japanese aviators had never experienced from an opponent. Zero pilots learned early that engaging this plane head-on was suicide. They tried defensive spirals, the American engine followed. They tried climbing escapes, the American engine laughed. They tried diving, the American engine became a falling star behind them. It created a new kind of fear in the sky, the fear of inevitability. Japanese pilots wrote reports describing the same terrifying sequence. You spot the plane, you turn hard, you feel confident, you've escaped worse. You breathe for 2 seconds, you look back, and it's there, closer than before. This wasn't normal dogfighting, this was pressure, weight, a constant presence on your tail that refused to obey the laws you had studied your entire life. And then came the guns. Japanese aircraft were deadly when they hit, but they carried small-caliber weapons designed for light frames. This new American fighter brought something else entirely. Heavy machine guns, high rate of fire, a wall of bullets that didn't just puncture, it shredded metal like paper. Pilots described watching their wingmen vanish in a cloud of debris, their aircraft folding in half from the sheer force of the impact. They reported hearing the gunfire from behind, a deep thunder that cut through wind and fear alike.
One pilot who survived being shot down said the moment the enemy opened fire, he felt as if the sky split open behind him. But the most terrifying aspect wasn't the guns or the armor or even the engine. It was the enemy flying it. American pilots did not fight like the Japanese expected. They fought without fear of losing energy. They fought without fear of structural failure. They fought knowing their machine would protect them if they made a mistake. This changed everything. American pilots could dive harder, pull sharper, climb steeper, fire longer. They had a margin of error that Japanese pilots did not. A Japanese mistake often meant death. An American mistake meant the plane absorbed the punishment and kept going. And so, Japan's elite, men who had built their identities on skill, maneuver, and discipline, found themselves staring at an opponent who played by different rules, an opponent who didn't need to match their elegance because overwhelming force made elegance irrelevant. As one Japanese ace wrote near the end of the war, "We are swords, they are hammers. Skill matters little when the hammer falls." And that hammer had a name that echoed across the Pacific, a name whispered in mess halls and briefing rooms like a warning, a name that meant power, a name that meant fear, a name that meant the sky was no longer theirs. And yet, the full truth of why this plane terrified Japan's best pilots had still not been revealed, because the machine was only half the story. The pilot culture behind it was the part Japan never saw coming.
Training, tactics, and the unavoidable collision of reality. Picture this: two pilots, two nations, two machines. On paper, they look like equals. In the sky, they lived in different universes. By 1945, American pilots flying the long-range P-51 missions from Iwo Jima were arguably the most thoroughly trained fighter pilots on Earth. Their Japanese counterparts were among the least prepared to ever enter combat in a major war. And this imbalance, this canyon between preparation and survival, was one of the final reasons Japan's top aces feared the arrival of a single American plane. To understand why, we need to step into the cockpit, not the metal, but the mind. A system built to create experts. When an American pilot climbed into a Mustang, he wasn't just flying a powerful machine. He was carrying the weight of thousands of hours of training, doctrine, and preparation. The average U.S. Army Air Force's fighter pilot had 450 to 600 flight hours before he ever saw a single enemy aircraft. These hours were exact, methodical, and expensive. They included formation maneuvers, gunnery practice, energy management tactics, instrument flying, aerobatic drills, high-altitude physiology training, emergency procedures, escort strategy, dive and zoom attack doctrine, recognition of enemy aircraft silhouettes. He had flown mock dogfights against veteran instructors. He had fired thousands of training rounds. He had been graded, evaluated, corrected, and molded. In short, he had failed safely dozens of times long before his first real mission, so he wouldn't fail when it counted. The Japanese pilot, a brilliant warrior, abandoned by his own system. Now step into the cockpit of a Japanese pilot in 1945. He is young, very young, often barely 20, sometimes with as little as 40 to 60 hours of total flying time. Not 400, not 600, 40. His instructors? Mostly gone, killed earlier in the war during years of attritional air combat Japan could not replace. His training flights? Cut because fuel was almost gone. Ammunition was rationed to almost nothing. Engines failed so often that flying itself was dangerous. Many rookies never fired their weapons in practice before facing American Mustangs. They were given theory instead of experience, manuals instead of mentorship, desperation instead of confidence. They weren't unskilled, they weren't incapable, they were simply arriving at the worst moment in their nation's history with the worst circumstances possible. The moment two worlds collided.
When a formation of P-51s swept into Japanese airspace over Tokyo, the difference was immediate and merciless. The Mustang pilots fought with the discipline, confidence, and aggression honed from years of consistent doctrine. Hit hard, hit fast, never turn, never stall, never get dragged into a slow fight. They used diving attacks from high altitude, attacks impossible to stop without a machine that could match their energy and climb rate. The Japanese pilots, flying Ki-84s that should have been competitive, could not match the Mustang's stability, fire discipline, or cohesion. Their formations broke apart under pressure. Their communication failed. Their approach to air combat, built for earlier wars and earlier aircraft, simply could not match the world America had built. It was the clash of two philosophies. Japan, individual skill, heroic action, and maneuverability. America, scientific training, group tactics, and energy warfare. And the winner was always going to be the one who could train, fuel, arm, support, and replace fighters faster than they were lost. The last brutal lesson for Japan's top pilots. Many surviving Japanese aces wrote after the war that the Mustang terrified them not because of its speed and not because of its power, but because of the man flying it. A pilot who had more training, more fuel, better radio coordination, reliable maps, rescue networks waiting offshore, an aircraft built with consistent quality, tactical doctrine proven in Europe for years. Japanese pilots wrote that when they saw Mustangs dive in from the sun, they saw not just airplanes, they saw the full weight of American industry and preparation in physical form. One pilot described it as fighting an enemy who had already planned the battle we were about to lose. The Mustang was not just an airplane, it was the product of a system Japan could no longer match. The human cost behind the machines. These missions were brutal on everyone involved. The American pilots endured 7 to 8 hours of cramped flying, ocean crossings with no landmarks, endless engine noise, constant fear of fuel starvation, violent weather fronts, anti-aircraft fire, the mental burden of knowing turning back meant abandoning the bombers they were protecting. The difference was this: the American pilot expected to come home. The Japanese pilot expected to die. That psychological gap was as large as the Pacific itself, and it shaped every clash between the two. Where the battle was truly won. Ultimately, this wasn't a duel between flyers. It wasn't a contest of bravery. Both sides were packed with courage. It was a confrontation between a nation with overflowing resources, a nation suffocating under shortages, a nation with a refined training pipeline, a nation forced to cut its program to the bone, a nation with modern doctrine, a nation stuck with early war tactics, a nation that could afford mistakes, a nation that could not. The P-51 Mustang became the symbol of that reality, a machine Japan's top pilots respected, feared, and often avoided unless they had no choice. Because they knew the truth. They weren't just battling a plane, they were battling inevitability. The plane that broke an empire's will. The final chapter of this story isn't written in blueprints, engines, or statistics. It's written in something far more powerful: psychology. When Japan's top pilots feared the P-51 Mustang, they weren't simply afraid of the machine. They were afraid of what it represented. Because by 1945, the Mustang was more than a fighter. It was the manifestation of a nation operating at full industrial, technological, and doctrinal capacity. A nation that had learned from every mistake, refined every tactic, and reached a level of aerial warfare Japan simply could not match. And this is where the story hits its deepest point, the moment Japan recognized that the war in the sky was already over long before its surrender. The shattering of a military myth. For decades, Japan had built its martial philosophy around the supremacy of the individual warrior. Skill, willpower, honor, that was the creed. But the war they found themselves fighting by 1945 was no longer a duel of aces. It was a war of supply chains, standardized parts, high-octane fuel, predictable maintenance, precision training, mass manufacturing, and relentless logistics. Japan was fighting with courage. America was fighting with a system. And the Mustang was the spear point of that system. When the first P-51s appeared over Tokyo, the shock was physical. Japanese pilots described it as a moment when their entire understanding of the war dissolved. They had been told repeatedly that no American single-engine fighter could reach the home islands. Yet here they were, dozens, escorting B-29s, flying with confidence, fighting with skill. It was like watching a prophecy break apart in mid-air. The impossible one, the machine that should not have existed. Japanese pilots had a nickname for the Mustang after those first missions, the impossible one. Not because of its combat performance, Japan had seen excellent enemy fighters before, but because it could reach altitudes their engines couldn't. It could stay in the sky longer than any land-based fighter they had ever faced. It could dive faster than they could track. It could climb out of danger before they could react. It could escort bombers all the way from Iwo Jima to Tokyo and back. But the most terrifying part was this. The Mustang never fought alone. It always arrived in disciplined, coordinated formations, groups that moved like a single organism, covering angles, protecting bombers, and initiating strikes with terrifying precision. Japanese scattered, inexperienced, fuel-starved pilots were no match. By the summer of 1945, Japanese commanders stopped pretending. Their internal reports were brutally honest. The P-51 outclassed anything they had in the air. Their pilots were being destroyed faster than they could train replacements. Their ground crews could no longer maintain the Ki-84 to reliable standards. Their fuel reserves were so low that pilots sometimes taxied to the runway with engines off, being physically pushed to save gasoline. One Japanese ace wrote, "We could no longer fight for victory. We fought only to delay inevitable defeat." The Mustang's presence over the capital made that inevitability visible to everyone, from generals to civilians. The psychological breakpoint. The Mustang's true victory wasn't in its kill ratios, although those were staggering. It was psychological. Every time Japanese pilots saw Mustangs weaving between the B-29s, it tore apart another layer of the myth that Japan could defend the homeland. The fear wasn't panic, it was the quiet, suffocating knowledge that the war had slipped beyond recovery. A surviving Japanese pilot later wrote, "The P-51 was not a plane, it was a verdict, and that verdict was final." The legacy left behind. Today, only one wartime Ki-84 remains, a ghost from a nation that ran out of time, fuel, steel, and pilots. Meanwhile, over 150 restored Mustangs still fly. Their Merlin engines roar at air shows across the world, living fossils of a moment when engineering excellence collided with historical momentum. Their survival is proof of something larger. The P-51 wasn't just a great fighter. It was the embodiment of a system Japan couldn't match, a system built on factories, doctrine, science, and training that reshaped the course of aerial warfare. And that is why Japanese top pilots feared this one plane, not because it was unbeatable, but because it revealed the truth. They weren't fighting an aircraft. They were fighting a world power operating at maximum force. The Mustang was the message. Japan understood it, and the war in the air ended the moment it appeared over Tokyo.